The courtroom was unusually still, the kind of stillness that amplified every sound. The rustle of paper, the faint creak of chairs, even the smallest cough. All of it echoed unnaturally, as if the walls themselves were waiting to hear what would happen next. In Lexington, Kentucky, this case had become the talk of the town. Everyone in the community, from lawyers to local shopkeepers, seemed to have an opinion about 6-year-old Amara Daniels and her uncertain future. On one side of the courtroom sat Vanessa Daniels, Amara's mother, a woman whose troubled past clung to her like a shadow. Her mistakes were not mere whispers. They were loud and glaring, dominating her chances of keeping custody of her daughter. On the other side was the state attorney, arguing that Amara's best chance lay not with her mother, but in the cold and impersonal system of foster care. Amara, however, was unlike any child they had ever met. Her presence filled the room in a way that belied her small stature. Sitting at the edge of her chair, her legs swung back and forth, a subconscious rhythm that gave away her nerves. She was dressed in a simple yellow dress, her hair braided neatly, with tiny barrettes catching the dim light. She clutched a worn-out stuffed bunny to her chest, the kind of toy that had clearly been loved and hugged through countless nights. Her wide, curious eyes scanned the room with a sharpness that seemed to absorb everything at once. Presiding over the case was Judge William Harper, a man whose reputation for fairness was as solid as the heavy wooden gavel that rested before him. His silver hair was combed neatly, his blue eyes sharp and observant, and his demeanor calm, as though nothing could shake him. Yet, even he seemed subtly off-balance today. It was the way Amara looked at him, direct, almost searching, that made him feel as though he were being silently judged himself. The case began with a tense formality. The state attorney presented their argument, laying bare Vanessa's history, poor decisions, brushes with the law, and a life that had seemed unstable at best. Vanessa's lawyer countered fiercely, painting a picture of a woman trying desperately to redeem herself, a mother fighting to reclaim her life and her daughter. It was the kind of courtroom drama that could have followed a predictable script until Amara took the stand. The bailiff escorted her carefully to the witness chair. The room grew unnaturally quiet again, the sound of her small shoes tapping against the polished floor echoing like a heartbeat. Vanessa leaned forward at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly, her lips moving in what seemed to be a silent prayer. Judge Harper adjusted his glasses, his posture slightly stiff, as though bracing himself for what was to come. "Amara," the judge began, his voice softer than usual, "do you know why you're here today?" "Yes, sir," she said, her tone steady and unflinching. She spoke like no 6-year-old ever should, clear and direct, with a wisdom that seemed out of place for someone her age. "I'm here because people don't know where I belong." Her words caused a ripple of unease in the room. Judge Harper nodded slightly, visibly impressed by her composure. "And where do you think you belong?" Amara paused, tilting her head as though she were searching for just the right words. Then, with quiet certainty, she said, "With my dad." A murmur swept through the courtroom. Harper's brow furrowed slightly, his composure intact but his interest visibly piqued. "And who do you believe your dad is?" Amara's gaze didn't waver. She raised a small hand and pointed directly at Judge Harper. "You are." The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, it seemed as though the world itself had stopped. The courtroom, which had been brimming with tension, now felt utterly frozen. Every eye was on Harper. Even the courtroom deputy, who had been standing casually at the door, straightened in disbelief. Harper leaned back in his chair, as if the very air around him had shifted. His face, usually calm and unreadable, betrayed a flicker of something. Shock, confusion, or perhaps a memory long buried. "Amara," he said carefully, his voice strained, "why do you think I'm your dad?" Her answer was immediate, simple, and devastating. "My mommy told me." She clutched her stuffed bunny tighter, her small hands trembling ever so slightly. "She said when I was born, you didn't want to be around, so you went away." At that, Vanessa shot to her feet. "That's not true," she cried, her voice cracking as she struggled to contain herself. The courtroom deputy moved toward her, gently urging her to sit back down. Vanessa complied, tears streaming down her face as she shook her head in despair. Judge Harper's grip tightened on the armrests of his chair. For the first time in his career, he looked unsure of what to do. The girl's words had struck a nerve, one he wasn't prepared to confront. Not here, not now, not like this. Order, he said finally, his voice regaining some of its authority. Order in the court. The room settled once more, though the tension lingered like a storm cloud refusing to dissipate. Harper turned back to Amara, his voice gentler now. Did your mother tell you anything else about me? Amara nodded. She said you're a judge, and that you help people. But she also said you never came back because you didn't love her. Her words cut deeper than any legal argument could. Vanessa buried her face in her hands, muffling her quiet sobs. Harper sat motionless, staring at the child who had just appended everything he thought he knew about himself and his past. The attorneys on both sides scrambled to regroup, whispering frantically to their clients. But all of it felt insignificant compared to the bombshell Amara had just dropped. Harper's usually steady hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together on the bench. Amara, he said after a long pause, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. What you've said is very serious. I need to ask, did your mother tell you this recently, or have you always known? Amara tilted her head thoughtfully. She told me a long time ago, she said, her voice soft, but I didn't really understand until I saw you today. When I came in here, I just knew you're my dad. For the first time in years, Judge William Harper found himself at a loss. The girl's words had opened a door he hadn't realized was still there, one that led straight to a part of his life he had long since locked away. The courtroom adjourned shortly after, but the storm Amara had unleashed was far from over. Harper retreated to his chambers, his mind spinning as he sank into his chair. Could it be true? Could this bright, precocious child really be his daughter? His thoughts drifted to Vanessa, to the woman he had known years ago, and to the choices that had led him here. For the first time in his career, the man who had always known the answers now faced a question he wasn't sure he could answer. The room was dimly lit, a stark contrast to the bright chaos of the courtroom earlier that day. Judge William Harper sat at his desk in his chambers, his usually unshakable demeanor unraveling as he stared blankly at the files scattered before him. The weight of Amara's revelation pressed heavily on his chest, making it nearly impossible to focus. The memories he had buried so meticulously over the years clawed their way back to the surface. He had known Vanessa Daniels once, a lifetime ago it seemed. Back then, she was a spirited, fiery woman with dreams of a brighter future. They had crossed paths briefly, a fleeting romance that burned bright and fast before fizzling out. He had never thought of it as anything more than a chapter in his past, a chapter he had moved on from without a second thought. But now, the past was sitting in his courtroom, staring at him with wide, innocent eyes and calling him Dad. A knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. It was his clerk, a young man named James, who hesitated at the threshold as if sensing the storm brewing in Harper's mind. Judge, are you all right? You've been in here for hours. I'm fine, James, Harper replied, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. Just going over some case files. James nodded, though his concern lingered in the air. If you need anything, let me know. Everyone's been talking about, well, you know. Harper stiffened. Of course they were talking. A child standing in open court and declaring him her father wasn't exactly something people would overlook. He nodded dismissively, and James quietly shut the door behind him. Left alone once more, Harper reached for the glass of water on his desk, his hand trembling slightly. He wasn't a man prone to doubt or indecision, but today had shaken him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He had always prided himself on his ability to separate his personal life from his professional responsibilities. Yet here he was, caught in the middle of a case that was more personal than anything he had ever faced. The next morning, the courtroom was buzzing with anticipation. The case had taken a dramatic turn, and everyone wanted to see how it would play out. Harper took his place at the bench, his face a mask of calm professionalism despite the turmoil within. Vanessa Daniels sat at her table, her shoulders slumped and her eyes red from sleeplessness and tears. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she barely acknowledged it. Across the room, The state attorney was preparing their argument, clearly eager to capitalize on the previous day's chaos. Amara, once again, sat in her little chair, clutching her stuffed bunny as if it were her only lifeline. Her presence was like a spotlight, drawing every gaze in the room. Harper's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary before he cleared his throat and called the court to order. "We will resume the case of Amara Daniels," he announced, his voice steady but devoid of its usual confidence. "Ms. Daniels, you may call your next witness." Vanessa's lawyer rose, adjusting her glasses as she approached the bench. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Vanessa Daniels to the stand." The courtroom tensed as Vanessa made her way to the witness chair. She looked fragile, as though the weight of the world rested on her shoulders. Once she was sworn in, her lawyer began the questioning. "Ms. Daniels, can you tell the court about your relationship with Judge Harper?" Vanessa hesitated, her eyes darting nervously toward Harper before she spoke. We were together for a few months, many years ago. It wasn't serious. At least, I didn't think it was at the time. And during that time, did you become pregnant?" "Yes," Vanessa admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I didn't tell him. I didn't think he wanted to know." Harper's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but he remained silent, his eyes fixed on the proceedings. "Why didn't you tell him?" the lawyer pressed. Vanessa took a deep breath, her hands clutching the edge of the witness stand. "Because I was scared. Scared he wouldn't believe me, scared he wouldn't care. He was already so focused on his career. I thought it would be better if I just handled it on my own." "And did you handle it on your own?" Vanessa's voice cracked as she replied, "I tried. I really tried. But life didn't go the way I planned. I made mistakes, and Amara paid the price for them." The courtroom was silent except for the faint sound of Vanessa's quiet sobs. Even the state attorney seemed momentarily at a loss for words. "Thank you, Ms. Daniels," her lawyer said gently before turning to Harper. "Your Honor, I'd like to request a recess so that we can gather additional evidence regarding these claims." Harper nodded, his expression unreadable. "Granted. Court will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. As the courtroom emptied, Harper remained seated, his mind racing. Vanessa's testimony had opened the door to a flood of questions he didn't know how to answer. Was it possible that Amara was truly his daughter? If so, what did that mean for the case, and for him? Later that evening, Harper found himself sitting in his car outside Vanessa's modest apartment building. He hadn't planned on coming here, but something had compelled him to seek answers outside the confines of the courtroom. Vanessa answered the door, her eyes widening in surprise at the sight of him. "Judge Harper," she said, her voice laced with uncertainty. "Vanessa," he replied, his tone softer than she expected. "We need to talk." She hesitated for a moment before stepping aside to let him in. The apartment was small but tidy, a testament to her efforts to create a stable environment for Amara. "I didn't expect you to come here," Vanessa admitted as she motioned for him to sit. "I didn't plan on it," Harper replied, his gaze fixed on her. "But after what happened in court today, I couldn't just leave it alone." Vanessa nodded, her hands fidgeting nervously. "What do you want to know?" "Is it true?" Harper asked, his voice steady but strained. "Amara, is she mine?" Vanessa looked away, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know," she confessed. "I never had a paternity test done, but in my heart, I've always believed she was." The weight of her words settled over him like a heavy blanket. For the first time, the possibility became real. Amara might be his daughter, a child he had never known, yet who might now depend on him in ways he had never imagined. As the night stretched on, Harper and Vanessa talked, delving into the past and the choices that had led them to this moment. By the time he left, the world seemed a little less certain, but one thing was clear. Whatever the truth was, it would change everything. The courtroom was eerily silent, the kind of quiet that only happens when the stakes are impossibly high. Judge Harper sat at the bench, his face a mask of composure, but beneath the surface, a storm of emotions churned. He scanned the room, his eyes briefly landing on Amara, who sat quietly with her stuffed bunny in her lap, her wide eyes taking in everything around her. Vanessa Daniels sat with her lawyer, her posture rigid, as though bracing herself for another blow. On the opposite side of the courtroom, the state attorney looked calm and calculating, their case meticulously prepared. "Court is now in session," Harper announced, his voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil within. Vanessa's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we would like to submit the results of the paternity test conducted yesterday as evidence." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Harper's heart skipped a beat, though he showed no outward reaction. He had agreed to the test reluctantly, understanding it was the only way to confirm or deny what had been weighing on his mind since the day Amara called him Dad. The clerk approached the bench, handing Harper a sealed envelope. He held it for a moment, the weight of it feeling disproportionate to its size. Taking a deep breath, he broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside. The words blurred together momentarily as his mind raced. When they finally came into focus, the truth hit him like a freight train. 99.9% probability. Amara was his daughter. The room seemed to hold its breath as Harper placed the document on the bench, his hands trembling ever so slightly. For the first time in his career, he struggled to find the words. "The results confirm that I am Amara Daniels' biological father," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual. Gasps and murmurs broke out among the spectators, quickly silenced by the sharp rap of Harper's gavel. He turned his attention to the attorneys. "Despite this revelation," he continued, regaining some of his composure, "my duty as a judge is to remain impartial and to determine what is in the best interest of the child." Vanessa's lawyer nodded, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Your Honor. With that in mind, we'd like to call our final witness." A woman entered the courtroom, her presence commanding immediate attention. She introduced herself as a social worker who had been assigned to Amara's case after her removal from Vanessa's care. "Ms. Carter," Vanessa's lawyer began, "can you share your professional opinion on Amara's current well-being and her attachment to her mother?" Ms. Carter adjusted her glasses before speaking. "Amara has a strong emotional bond with her mother. Despite the challenges Vanessa Daniels has faced, it is clear that she deeply loves her daughter and has made significant efforts to improve her circumstances." "And do you believe it is in Amara's best interest to remain with her mother?" "Yes," Ms. Carter said firmly. "Provided that Vanessa continues to meet the conditions set by the court and child welfare services, I believe Amara would thrive in her care." The state attorney rose for cross-examination, their tone sharp and deliberate. "Ms. Carter, are you aware of the multiple instances in which Ms. Daniels failed to meet those same conditions in the past?"